Welcome to David's Rebel Coding Podcast. In this episode, we are going to create a newspaper article, and we're going to look a little bit about the history of the World Wide Web in the process. So, the early web used to be that the technology evolved such that you would publish a folder on your computer that other computers could access. And the browser was a way of interpreting a new language that was invented called markup language. And what basically still drives the internet and the World Wide Web today is just being able to process HTML. A little bit of JavaScript was added later, and dynamic content. So what do all those things mean? Well, in the beginning, it used to just be that you would dump files into the published folder. And in fact, it's still called www in Apache today. And Apache was the world leader in web application servers back in the mid-90s and has continued to dominate the industry since. So I'm just going to put this template down for a static website. So it's just the browser instantly processing the HTML and the JavaScript. You cannot write a faster code than that. This is like the C programming of HTML. It is the static file. Where you start to slow down a little is when you are doing multiple fetches and you are reposting the data, so you leave the page and redraw it. If you're server-side producing the HTML, that can be slow. So once the HTML is created into a file, that is the fastest the web server can be to render that on the screen. Now, the challenge is that you want usability from your users. You want to change content on the screen, sure, but you don't want to leave the screen while you're doing it. So you need to get smart about how you can achieve that. So as the web evolved and the world became more mature, we came up with something called dynamic code. So what does that mean? That means that, let's say the Daily Herald, we want to come from a variable. So in JavaScript, we can define a title called the Daily Planet, like Superman. And then we can dynamically inject that into the HTML. And it's a little slower because you're introducing JavaScript, but it's still blazingly fast. So and the way to do that is using, in JSP pages in Java, it was called the L syntax, and you would first have to develop your Jakarta Java servlets and then redirect to a JSP. You had to bind Java beans to the JSP page, and then you could use this declarative syntax embedded inside of the DOM elements, the HTML, and it would dynamically render the resolution of that variable into the page. So let me show you. If I just put in title, it'll switch to the Daily Planet. You can see that was pretty fast. Now, what if we wanted to add a widget below? So like some functionality, we want the user to do something that's going to change the page. Back in 2000 and earlier, you would have to redraw the whole page, and often the technologies were designed to push the HTML from some higher level scripting language, whether it be CGI scripts or PHP scripts or Java code, or if you're writing ASP, and later we had C#.NET. So let's look at how this early theory is the way that the internet has come full circle. We've come back around to where we started in the 90s, and we're recognizing that we should never have thrown out our technologies, and we should continue to use the HTML and the JavaScript because they are still the most powerful languages for the web. So let's see how we can achieve this. So to get a lightning fast, responsive user interfaces, here's what you need. So if I put in a button, for example, you can just see it on the screen. So a simple button tag, I call it go. And there it is on the screen, so you see it. Now you can interact. Now this is the first control that we've introduced. But I wanted to do something, so I wanted to define a function. Now some of the criticism some people have had about the new frameworks is that there's a steep learning curve and you have to transpile the code. It's not technically JavaScript or HTML. It's a blend. It's a new invention. So you're going to have to learn another language, and it's like that's an extra step that a lot of people, it's a barrier to entry. So if we reduce those barriers and we just know that our language already supports on-click events, why not use them? So if I did an increment, then it's going to call a function, but nothing happens. And nothing seems to happen. But if we put a count or a counter in, and then we hit the button, we can see that we have that the view default application already implemented. And so how are we able to do that? So let's look at the JavaScript for the increment. All we're doing is defining a variable called counter, incrementing that variable, and then to refresh the page, we're just self-set JSON, and it dynamically goes and does a hotfix to the HTML DOM. It analyzes only the DOM elements that are going to be affected by the data change and update those so that the rest of the page stays responsive with the user. So you can have multiple things changing and moving at the same time without affecting other components. Now let's say we wanted to load this in, and we want to create this as a component, then we can do this too. So to do this, let's say we want to create a counter control. So let me create a new file called counter, and then we want to be able to dynamically load this in. So first, let me go and grab the button, and I'll just put it in the HTML for this counter control. Go back here, and then instead of this button here, we can now bring it in using JXT. JXT stands for Java Extensible Template. So this is the templating language that you're seeing before you. So it's just HTML with basically embedded JavaScript. So it's much like the JSPs of the mid-90s. So let's take a look at how to bind this now. So I think, if I can remember correctly, I just need to say counter, and then we'll have our button. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just referencing the name, and then it's functional. So this way you can add widgets and you can become scalable, because there's no limit to the amount of complexity, and the more complex your project becomes, you don't have to wait for longer compile times like you do with traditional languages and bloated development environments and IDEs like you would if you were developing a Java Jakarta servlet application. The bigger it gets, the longer it takes to compile. The same problem in .NET. And in this way as well, you also get, this is actually powered by Java with Oracle on the back end, but the application programming interface is accessible through JavaScript JSON syntax. So you can affect changes to your application programming interface dynamically, so it doesn't take you a lot of compile time to update the server side. Plus there's a policy file implementation that allows you granular control, column control, to restrict access of columns or tables of data to particular users. So it has full security implementation built into the solution. We'll worry about that in another episode. But right now I'm just looking at the way that web application should have been done originally. And actually they had this technology back in the 90s. It's just that Microsoft kind of took over and then got people away from that paradigm. And then the Java people were only used by big banks and government traditionally. So, and development times in a Java project were always longer and more complicated to work with than the Microsoft technologies. But the principles that they laid out are almost like a Bible for the internet, and they did define an appropriate separation of concerns between the presentation layer and the business data logic layer, as well as how to manage complexity and become scalable in your development. And so we've done that here with this templating engine. And it uses vanilla JavaScript, which means that you have no learning curve. Also, your code is saved in the cloud, which means that it's secure in a database, and so you can decide who gets access to what. And so it's an additional layer of security for the code itself. So then your JavaScript can really act like server-side code because it's concealed behind the vault. And you can quickly prototype a project right in front of a client. So like if you were sitting down with a client, and you don't have to install anything. This is directly through a web browser. So you have a full integrated development environment directly in the browser. So all you have to do is go to the URL, put your API key in, and you have access to GenAPI system, which allows you rapid prototyping. And look, if you make a mistake, your errors will automatically be highlighted in the appropriate place on the page so you can find them. So this is in the title. The error shows up in the title. And then if you have another error down in counter, I used the wrong variable here. You'll see that the error shows up down in the button. So you can tell where the errors are materializing. So you should never really have that issue of writing JavaScript code that is not been vetted, has not been tested. You don't know if it doesn't work. In this case, the templating engine will let you know immediately if there is an error, and it will show up right so that you can't miss it. It isn't in some cryptic log file that you have to search for or open up special dev tools in the browser like Firefox and go into the console. It shows up directly on the page. So then you can, oh, that's not right. Let's fix it. So that is actually the variable is called title. And then we're back in action, and then we have our widget. So I just wanted to introduce you to this new technology, Hello World, the Daily Planet. This is how you can do dynamic content, and you can work with your database directly using JSON syntax in the JavaScript. And then your business logic is contained in one spot, and your presentation layer with the templating engine works very intuitively, and you can work with your desktop publishing and your graphic designers in a more intuitive way, so you can have multiple people. I should add as well that their source control is built into the infrastructure, so you could have multiple people working on the same file, and the system will identify the differences between the two files. It will highlight them, and your developer will have the chance to choose how to edit the file to check it in before they overwrite somebody else's code. And then you can collaborate with bigger teams on more complex projects. All online without having to install anything, no barriers to entry, and with instant validation, and you can see errors directly in the page. So it's going to dramatically decrease the amount of time that it takes to develop a web application, save you, I would say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we think that this is a great product as we move into a dynamic 2026 and as we look into the next decades ahead. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe below. That's part of the algorithm. And we'll get this rolling, get this published online, and so that you can try it out yourselves. But for now, just enjoy the video and click like and subscribe. Leave a comment below, and we'll see you in the next video.